After seeing the title of this video, I know what you might be thinking. This guy's an idiot if he thinks 300 is remotely true to history. Well, I'm here to say, hear me out. Let's get rid of the obvious embellishments. No, the Persians didn't have rhinos or trolls at the Battle of Thermopylae, and let's face it, Leonidas probably didn't have a rippling six-pack. After all, he was 60 years old at the time. But if you look past these embellishments and a few others, 300 is more accurate than you might think. Let's start where Leonidas kicks the Persian envoy into a well. Xerxes sends out messengers through all of Greece asking the kings for their surrender. Leonidas doesn't like this question and kicks the Persian envoy into a well. I was really interested to find that this actually did happen, but it didn't only happen in Sparta, it also happened in other Greek cities like Athens. And it happened 10 years prior during Darius's invasion, but it's possible it might have also happened during Xerxes' invasion. Now let's talk about right before the Battle of Thermopylae, when Leonidas and the 300 meet up with another group of Greeks. This is accurate because about 7,000 Greeks defended the pass, and only about 300 of them were Spartan. So there were other Greeks defending the pass, including the Peloponnesians, the Corinthians, the Phocians, and a few other regions. Despite what you see in the movie, this was not intended to be a suicide mission. This was intended to keep the Persians at bay long enough for the rest of Greece to create a proper defense. Xerxes' army arrived sooner than the Greeks intended, though, and they did think about retreating, but decided to stay, and sent for immediate reinforcements. Now, why were the Greeks so keen on defending the hot gates of Thermopylae? Well, this is a very strategic area to hold off the Persians, since they needed to pass through it to reach the rest of Greece, and it was a narrow pass with ocean on one side and steep mountains on the other. Here, the vast Persian numbers of an estimated 100,000 to 150,000 would mean much less than on an open battlefield. Not to mention the Greeks could attempt to outlast the Persians, needing much less resources to fuel their army. Now let's talk about how the terrain favored the Greek fighting style. The Greeks fought in a hoplite phalanx formation, where a group of soldiers would be tightly knit with their shields locked. This formation, along with the bronze helmets, bronze-coated shields, and long iron-tipped spears, would be very difficult to attack with the much more lightly armed Persians. This is where I have to tell you that no, the Spartans didn't go into battle in leather loincloths and cool-looking superhero capes. I really hope they had the capes, but I didn't look that up. The Spartans wore bronze helmets, bronze greaves, carried a long iron-tipped spear, a bronze-coated wooden shield, and are known for having a bronze breastplate, but might have worn leather at this point in history. According to Herodotus, the Persians did have some armor-scaled cavalry and some heavier units like the Immortals, but it's likely that a lot of their army were lighter ranged units like archers. As for their infantry, they had shorter spears and did not attack in a phalanx formation, putting them at a disadvantage to the Greeks. On day one of battle, Xerxes ordered that 5,000 archers barrage the Greek infantry, but the arrows were ineffective against the Hellenistic bronze shield and armor. Xerxes then ordered 10,000 soldiers to attack the Greek lines, and according to Herodotus, these men were cut to ribbons and had no more effect than the arrows. 300 might have you thinking that the Spartans did the majority of the fighting, but they actually swapped out with the rest of the Greek armies to prevent fatigue. Herodotus also tells us that on day one of battle, Xerxes sent the Immortals to attack the Greeks, and they took heavy casualties because the Greeks continued to mock retreat and then attack the Immortals when they were vulnerable. Xerxes sent another attack on day 2 of battle, thinking the Greeks would be tired and wounded from the first day of fighting, but they were no more lucky than the previous day's assaults. Xerxes' fortunes changed, however, when a local named Ephialtes showed the Persians a mountain pass, stretching around the battlefield, that they could use to flank the Greeks. That night, Xerxes sent one of his commanders, Hydarnes, with 20,000 men through the pass to surround the Greeks. Early on day 3 of battle, the Phocians who were guarding the pass heard the rustling of Persians and started to quickly arm themselves on a nearby hill. The Persians, not wanting to waste time, fired a volley of arrows at them and kept going. A runner informed Leonidas and the Greeks that the Persians were flanking them, and a war council was immediately called. This resulted in most of the Greek army leaving, and around 2,000 Greeks, including the 300 Spartans, staying behind to fight to the death. It's debated whether it was Spartan law to fight to the death, or if this was a myth born from this one time that Leonidas stayed behind. The most likely reason for why he stayed behind was to perform a protective barrier for the retreating majority of the army, since if they all stayed, they would all die, and if they all fled, they would get run down by the Persian cavalry. In the morning on the third day, the Persians began their assault, and the Greeks fought with their spears until they shattered. Then with their short swords, taking 2 of Xerxes' brothers with them. Leonidas was shot by arrows during the battle, and there was a fight over his body. The Greeks gathered his body and made a stand on a nearby hill, where they were finished off by arrows. An estimated 20,000 Persians died at the Battle of Thermopylae, along with 2,000 to 4,000 Greeks. So yes, I guess we could say that overall 300 is more realistic than it gets credit for. Yes, it does embellish the battle and gives the Spartans way more credit than they probably deserve, but it gets a lot right too. You wouldn't expect a movie as propaganda-filled as this one to mention the actual battle tactics of the small passageway or the hoplite phalanx. And it even gets the Spartan attire mostly correct, that being everything except for the loincloth. Not to mention, it shows that there were other Greeks and shows them swapping out during the battle like they actually did. Yes, there were no rhinos, Xerxes probably wasn't wearing a loincloth, but everyone else in the movie was wearing a loincloth, so he probably should be too. They also make it clear in this movie that there are going to be embellishments when they show that it's being told from the Greek perspective. But in conclusion, this movie gets thrown under the bus way more than it should in terms of accuracy. That being said, if you made it this far, feel free to subscribe for more, and let me know what historical topics you'd like us to do next.